Rupert Gould's boots crunched on the gravelly soil of Terran Green, the sound a constant companion in the vast, quiet wasteland that stretched endlessly around him. As a seasoned nomad, Rupert had adapted to the solitude and survival instincts required in this harsh world, his life a series of movements from one temporary shelter to another, always scavenging, always watching. On this day, under the relentless glare of the twin suns that scorched the planet, Rupert's journey took him through a particularly barren stretch between the scattered settlements. His eyes, shielded against the dust and sunlight by a pair of worn goggles, scanned the horizon for anything useful, a forgotten scrap of technology, perhaps, or the unfortunate remains of less fortunate travelers. It was amidst this desolation that Rupert spotted a figure, sprawled awkwardly against a half-buried chunk of debris. As he approached, the figure's details became clearer. It was a man, clad in the distinct armor of a Tellurian soldier, his uniform marked with scorch marks and dirt. The man was barely conscious, his breath shallow and labored, a clear sign of severe injury. Rupert's first instinct was caution. Tellurians were not typically friends to the nomads. However, the sight of the wounded soldier, so obviously in pain and helpless, triggered a deeper, more humane response. He knelt beside the man, quickly assessing his injuries. The soldier had been caught in a skirmish with the Forgotten. This much was evident from the residual damage on his armor and the nature of his wounds, likely from energy weapons that the cult was known to favor. "Hey, can you hear me?" Rupert asked, gently tapping the soldier's cheek. The man's eyes fluttered open, confusion and weariness clouding his gaze. He tried to shift, grimacing with pain. "Don't move," Rupert instructed, his voice calm. He dug into his backpack for his scant medical supplies, a roll of bandages, some antiseptic, and a painkiller he'd been saving for his own emergencies. With efficient movements born of necessity, Rupert cleaned the soldier's wounds and bandaged them as best he could. The soldier watched him, his initial distrust gradually giving way to resigned acceptance. "What's your name?" Rupert asked, hoping to ground the man more firmly in the present. "Jensen," the soldier rasped, his voice hoarse. "Corporal Arlen Jensen." "I'm Rupert," he replied, offering a grim smile. "Looks like you've had a rough day, Jensen." Jensen managed a nod, his eyes closing again briefly. "Wasn't supposed to end up like this. Got separated during the retreat." Rupert knew that moving Jensen would be risky. He was clearly in no state to travel without help. But leaving him here, in the open wasteland, was a certain death sentence. Despite the inherent risks, the thought of abandoning a fellow human in such dire straits was unthinkable to Rupert. "You're not far from a Tellurian town, maybe 4 days' trek west from here," Rupert mused aloud, more to himself than to Jensen. "I'll help you get there." Jensen opened his eyes, studying Rupert with a new intensity. "Why? Why help me?" Rupert shrugged, his gaze returning to the horizon. "Because if I were lying here instead of you, I'd hope someone would do the same for me. Doesn't matter where you come from." With that, Rupert hoisted Jensen's arm over his shoulder, carefully lifting the soldier to his feet. They both knew the journey would be arduous, and Rupert's plans were significantly derailed. But in that moment, under the harsh suns of Terran Green, a bond forged by circumstance and a shared humanity took its first, faltering steps forward. As Rupert and Corporal Jensen set out across the scarred landscape of Terran Green, the world around them seemed indifferent to their struggle. The journey ahead was daunting, 4 days through territories that were hostile at best and deadly at worst. Every step was a test of endurance and trust, their initial mutual suspicion gradually giving way under the weight of shared hardships. Navigating the treacherous terrain required constant vigilance. Rupert, with his intimate knowledge of the land, took the lead, his eyes scanning for signs of the Forgotten's patrols. The cult was known for its merciless treatment of outsiders, and their patrols were frequent in areas close to their territories. Several times, Rupert and Jensen were forced to take cover, hiding in the skeletal remains of long-abandoned vehicles or beneath the scant shadow of twisted metal structures, remnants of a more prosperous past. Scavenging for food and water added another layer of difficulty to their journey. Rations were meager, consisting mostly of canned goods Rupert had planned to trade at the next settlement. Water was even scarcer, each sip carefully rationed to make sure they could reach the town without succumbing to dehydration. As they shared these sparse meals, the barriers between them slowly began to erode. During these moments of respite, Rupert shared stories of his life as a nomad, He spoke of the freedom it offered, a stark contrast to the constant warfare that characterized the factions' interactions. His choice to live outside the rigid structures of the settlements was born out of a desire to escape the endless cycle of aggression and reprisal that seemed to define Terran Green. Not all battles are fought with weapons, Rupert mused one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of fire. Some are fought by choosing not to fight at all. Jensen, in turn, opened up about his life as a Tellurian soldier. He spoke of his initial pride in serving his faction, a pride that had slowly eroded as he witnessed the consequences of their actions on the ground. His regrets were palpable, especially regarding the recent skirmish with the Forgotten that had led to his injuries and separation from his unit. "I joined thinking I could make a difference, maybe even find peace someday," Jensen confessed. "But now, I'm not so sure peace is something you can win with a gun." As they neared the Tellurian town, the landscape changed, becoming more structured with signs of permanent habitation. However, this civilization brought its own set of dangers. Rupert's presence, a nomad in the company of a Tellurian soldier, drew suspicious glances from the few travelers they encountered. Tension escalated as they approached the town's fortified gates, their final obstacle. Upon arrival, their fears were realized. The town guards, wary of any threat, especially from a nomad, detained them at the gate. Despite Jensen's protests and attempts to explain Rupert's role in his survival, the guards were unyielding. They were led through the gate under guard, the town's curious and often hostile eyes following their every step. Rupert found himself thrown into a holding cell, the cold, iron bars a stark contrast to the open wasteland he was used to. As he sat there, the weight of his decision pressing down on him, he couldn't help but wonder if his choice to help Jensen had been a grave mistake. Meanwhile, Jensen, though injured and exhausted, argued vehemently for Rupert's release, his voice a blend of frustration and determination. The uncertainty of their situation hung heavy in the air as night fell over the town, a reminder of the fragile line they walked between camaraderie and the deep-seated divisions that still defined the world of Terran Green. Locked in a sparse, dimly lit cell within the fortified walls of the Tellurian town, Rupert Gold found himself wrestling with a cruel irony. He had ventured across dangerous lands to deliver a wounded soldier to safety, only to be rewarded with suspicion and confinement. The cold iron bars seemed to mock his notions of camaraderie and moral duty, leaving him to ponder the potentially high cost of his altruistic act. Outside his confinement, Corporal Jensen, though still weak from his injuries, was becoming increasingly aware of Rupert's situation. Upon learning of Rupert's imprisonment, a deep sense of responsibility washed over him. Jensen had been semi-conscious when Rupert had first aided him, and he knew all too well that without Rupert's intervention, he would have certainly perished in the wasteland. Jensen, determined not to let his savior suffer an unjust fate, insisted on speaking to the town's authorities. Supported by a makeshift crutch, he limped into the Central Command office, his uniform marked with the stains of battle and medical intervention. There, he recounted the tale of their encounter and journey, emphasizing Rupert's unwavering decency and the humanity that had driven him to help a total stranger. "Rupert is not a spy, nor a thief," Jensen declared, his voice resonating with conviction. "He's the reason I'm standing here today. We talk about honor and loyalty as if they belong only to Tellurians, but this man, a nomad, has shown more of both than many I know." The impact of Jensen's words was palpable. The officers, hardened by countless tales of betrayal and conflict, found themselves reconsidering the situation. The notion that someone from the outside could display such selflessness was a challenging yet refreshing perspective. Moved by Jensen's testimony and recognizing the need to foster goodwill, especially given the increasingly complex relations among Terran Green's various factions, the authorities decided to release Rupert. More than that, they chose to reward him for his actions. When Rupert was brought from the cell, he found Jensen waiting, a small, grateful smile breaking through the soldier's usual stoicism. In a modest ceremony, Rupert was given not just his freedom but also supplies including weapons, ammunition, food, and water resources that were invaluable and would significantly elevate his status among the nomads. The town's commander, a stern woman with deep-set eyes, handed over the supplies personally. "Your actions have shown great courage and integrity," she said. "Let this be a token of our appreciation and a bridge towards understanding between our peoples." As Rupert prepared to leave, the atmosphere was one of cautious respect. Some townspeople nodded their heads in acknowledgement, As he passed, others remained wary, their suspicions not entirely allayed. But for Rupert, the experience had transformed his view of the Tellurians from distant adversaries to potential allies in the quest for a more unified Terran Green. With his supplies secured and his spirits lifted by the unexpected turn of events, Rupert set off towards Nomad territories. The journey back was lighter, not just in the absence of a wounded companion, but buoyed by a sense of accomplishment and hope. As the town faded into the distance, Rupert reflected on the bond forged in adversity with Jensen and pondered the possibilities of change on a broader scale. Maybe, he thought, the seeds of peace aren't found in treaties or negotiations, but in simple acts of kindness between strangers. The story closed on this note of cautious optimism. While the deep-seated divisions and mistrust among Terran Green's factions were far from resolved, Rupert's experience suggested that change was possible, one unlikely friendship at a time. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe. See you for our next sci-fi adventure.